All right. Look, we've got one person joined so far. Looks like Leon has joined, and Jackie and Pamela have just joined. G'day, guys. Thanks for joining us today. You're a few minutes ahead of schedule, so thanks very much for logging on early. Got a couple more people coming through. We've got Kate. Hi, Kate. And Kim. Good afternoon, Kim. So thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. We're just going to give things a few minutes because there's a few more people to join, and we'll kick things off in a few minutes' time. But look, in the meantime, again, thanks for joining us on today's webinar. We're really excited to have you with us today. Given this is a presentation webinar, if you're unfamiliar with the content or you haven't done one of these before, that's okay. So you don't need to have your webcam working. We don't need to be able to see you, and you actually won't be seeing Cynthia and myself today. So just make sure you can hear us okay. If you can't, if anyone's having any issues with their audio, you can let me know in the chat box down the bottom. And if anyone's having any issues with their screen, you can do the same thing. And we just had James join us. G'day, James. How are you? Catherine's in here, and Paul. So look, we've got a good 10 people on the webinar so far, so that's a great turnout. Thanks everyone for joining us. And look, while we're waiting for everyone else to join the webinar, which we're going to kick off in a couple of minutes, maybe people would like to just share a little bit about who they are and where they're calling in from today. I'll start things off. I'm Dan. My full name's Dan Price. I work for Dearin Associates, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. You can contact me either by the question and answer box down the bottom of your screen. So make sure you can see that. And just next to that, you should have a chat box. So make sure you've got access to both of those because we will be using them throughout the webinar. We've also had Gemma join us. Hi, Gemma. Cosmos is here. And Annalise as well. So fantastic. Thanks everyone for jumping in. All right, so look, yeah, I mean, let's get things sort of going just so we know who's on the call. So look, if people would really like to start by just writing in the chat and letting me know who you are, perhaps what your business is, just so we can get an idea of what kind of companies we've got joining us on the webinar today, that'd be fantastic. And maybe let me know where you're calling in from as well. I mean, most people should be based in Victoria, I would imagine, or near Victoria. I'm in Melbourne myself, in North Melbourne. So let me know who you are and where you're calling in from. Leon's written in. Yep, we've seen that, Leon. Thanks for the message. And Cosmos is calling in from Mordiliac down there on the coast. And Cosmos works with chilled food products. Fantastic. Gemma from Hunted and Gathered in Cremorne. Thanks, Gemma. It's fantastic. And how's the weather for you guys? I mean, it's been a bit hit and miss where I am, but I know Victoria can be 4 seasons in a day and probably a few more depending on where you are. So let us know how things are in your area. And again, for those of us who've just joined, we're just waiting for a few more participants to join in on the webinar before we kick things off. Okay, we've got Paul Kirkham. G'day, Paul. Paul's joining us from Amino Active Australia. So they're located in Bayswater. And Amino Active make sports nutrition products. Fantastic. I've also got Leon. Leon is from Easy Chef, who do export and consolidation in South Melbourne. Yeah, nice. Thanks, Leon. And Scott from Pride's Confectionery. So look, I mean, already we've got a pretty broad mix across the food and beverage sector. And I think that's a really good opportunity for you guys to jump in and start connecting before Food and Beverage Trade Week kicks off in a few weeks' time. We've also got Kim Natalie. She's dialing into the webinar from Robin Vale Estate Olive Oil and Live and Love Gourmet Foods and Granola. Fantastic. Great to have you here, Kim. Thanks for your message. And Catherine has joined, or Kate. She's just saying that her company does a range of French-inspired biscuits, meringues, lavash crackers for retail and food service. It sounds delicious. Thanks, Kate. That's making me hungry. And we've also got Annalise from Select Harvests Food Products and Pamela from Chocolat. Yeah, fantastic, guys. All right, so look, just a couple of minutes before we really get the webinar going. So again, for anyone who just missed the kind of details, again, we don't need to be able to see or connect via the webcam. We just need to make sure that you can hear us okay. So whether you're listening through headphones or a speaker, just make sure that you can hear Cynthia and myself okay. If you can't, you can send me a direct message in the chat. And make sure you can see the screen. So whether you're using a laptop or a desktop, you might be using your phone or an iPad, as long as you can see the content, because we'll be using the presentation for a lot of today's content. And we've also got, Catherine's just saying that the name of her company is Asterisk Kitchen. Yeah, fantastic. I've seen your video, guys. I think you guys make some great food. That looks also very tasty. And we've got Stephen Harper from Peter's Ice Cream. He's on board. Very nice. Thanks to everyone for writing in. All right, we might just give it another 30 seconds or so. We've got about 20 people here with us on the webinar, so that's a really good amount. In a second, I will throw over to my colleague, Cynthia Dearin, and she'll be running today's webinar. And we'll get into some housekeeping in a second, but although I mentioned that we don't need to be able to see you and you just need to be able to see the screen, we are hoping that today's webinar will be a little bit interactive. I mean, it's really for you guys to make sure you can get the most out of the content. In the next hour, we've got a lot of content to cover. So we really want to make sure you, get something from today and you leave the webinar with a really clear idea of how you can create a great export pitch for your food or beverage business. So I will just ask that, people keep it up, keep writing in the chat, and make sure you're kind of ready to connect and engage, because I think we've got some really good stuff to get through. All right, cool. And just had James Scott just say he's also calling in from Victoria from Harvest Box, and Harvest Box make healthy snacks manufactured here in Melbourne. Thanks, James. Great to have you join us. All right, well, look, we've got a pretty good amount of people here. So Cynthia, we might get things started. So I'll throw over to you and feel free to kick things off.
Thanks so much, James. Thanks so much, Dan. Hi, everybody. It's great to have you along today. On behalf of Trade Victoria and Dearin Associates, I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, How to Create a Great Export Pitch. So you're here today because you either run or work for a business which is participating in Food and Beverage Trade Week, and you'd like to learn how to create a great pitch for your food or beverage export business. Now, we are delighted to have you with us, and just hearing Dan read out all those names and those companies and those products, it looks like we've got a really fantastic selection of companies with us today. So we're looking forward to hearing a little bit more from you guys in just a few minutes. But before we do that, we're just going to introduce ourselves a little and tell you a little bit about us. My name is Cynthia Dearin. I'm the Managing Director of Dearin Associates, and you've already heard a little bit from Dan, our International Business Advisor based in Melbourne. Dan's going to be moderating today's session, and I'll be presenting the content. Dan, over to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. So like I said, it's great to have everyone join us. Thanks very much for making the commitment to be here today. I know you're all very busy and your time is really valuable, so we really appreciate you joining us here for today's session. We'll quickly just cover off a couple of housekeeping points. So like I said, you don't need to have your webcam on, just make sure you can see the screen and hear us, and that's all you need to do in terms of technology. I mean, the digital environment can be really distracting, so it's probably a good idea, if you haven't already done it, just to close any other windows you might have open. You might have Facebook running in the background or Twitter or something. Probably worth just shutting those for the next hour. Grab a glass of water if you haven't already done so, and maybe a pen and paper if you want to grab any notes. Like I mentioned, there is a question and answer function that we'll be using throughout the webinar, so we'll get to that in a few slides' time. If you do have any questions about the content, you can type them into the chat box or send me a private message if you need to, and we'll do our best to answer all your questions as we go. And again, just make sure you guys bring your A game today. I mean, there's a lot coming from us, but again, we really want you to get the most from the session. So please, interact, engage, answer the questions, let us know what you think of what we're presenting and talking about. And that way, you can make sure that it's really tailored for your specific needs and your specific business. So I hope everyone's ready to get into it, and we might officially kick things off. Okay, so again, thanks to everyone for attending today. And we're offering everyone who's on today's How to Create a Great Export Pitch webinar a free version of our Killer Pitch deck. Okay, so this is a great tool that we've created. We'll be offering it to you all that you can use to take home after the webinar and to use when you're designing your own killer pitch at home or in your business. It's packed full of some really good, useful and practical advice. So we'll make sure that we send out a link to everyone who's registered so you can download the killer pitch deck at your own leisure. And for those of you who are able to stay right through the webinar, right until the end, we'll show you how you can get a copy of the slides from today's recording and from today's session. And we'll also have another really cool prize. We do have to keep you going for the next hour, so we won't give away the details just yet, but make sure you stay through the webinar and stick around to the end, and we'll give you some more information about that at the end of the session. We've already had a bit of a chat around who's here. If you haven't already written in the text box, probably a great opportunity to just let us know who you are, what your company's called, and what your business or product is all about. So if people want to just let me know again, if you haven't, what industries you're in, and perhaps if you've done business internationally, or some of you might only be thinking about this. So let us know if you're new to the international business environment, or whether you had some experience exporting your products and your goods overseas. And maybe you could also write in and just let us know if there are any challenges that you found with pitching to international buyers. I imagine many of you have had opportunities to pitch your business to people before. You might have participated in a food and beverage trade week event in the past. This might be your first year. But again, if you've had experience pitching or speaking to international buyers, let us know, write it in the chat box. And tell us about those experiences. And if there's anything that you really want to get from today's session, make sure you let us know as well. We've got a lot of content to cover, and we'll do our best to answer everything. But if you've got a specific goal, let us know. Carmen Ventura, she's the MD of South Food Group. She's telling us that she has a business that does small goods, processed meats, mainly food service, and they export to about 10 countries. Fantastic. That's a great amount, Carmen. Thanks for that. Stephen from Peters is saying that they do very limited international business, but they're building up from scratch. They've got a couple of trade events in Melbourne coming up. That's great to hear. All right. Well, look, keep them coming, and we'll read them out as we go through. And I might throw back to Cynthia now to tell us a little bit about Dearin Associates.
Thanks, Dan. Folks, it's great to hear a little bit about the people who are writing in, just telling us what you're up to, where you're exporting to, or where you hope to export to. You're sharing a bit of your story, and that's fantastic. We want to share a little bit of ours. So I'm just going to introduce myself and then let Dan tell you a little bit about himself. I've spent the past 16 years working internationally, firstly as a diplomat and then later as a management consultant and a CEO. In 2013, I started Dearin Associates to help Australian companies to access international markets, and that's what I do today. I'm really passionate about facilitating international business and about helping life-changing products and services get onto the international stage. So that's me. Dan, over to you.
Cool. So I'm an international business advisor with Dearin Associates. I've got about 5 years experience in the international arena. I've lived, worked and studied in the Middle East, in North America and the UK. And I'm really passionate about helping Australian companies, just like all the awesome ones we've got joining us today, succeed overseas. So that's a little bit about my story. I think we might jump into finding out what we're covering today. So Cynthia, I'll throw it back to you for a bit of an overview.
Fantastic. So folks, look, what we're doing today is pretty straightforward. We're going to be looking at the content in 3 sections. So firstly, we're going to talk about why your business needs a great pitch in the first place. Then we're going to be talking about what goes into making a great export pitch. And then thirdly, we're going to be highlighting some of the mistakes that you really need to avoid. Once we've done that, we're going to do a wrap up and a Q&A to cover off anything that we might have missed that you want to know about. And we're going to do our best to finish right on 2 p.m. Now, I speak pretty quickly and I tend to cover a lot of ground. So if you miss something that I say, or it's not clear, or it raises a question for you, please just type your question into the chat box and Dan will pick that up and pass it across to me, and I can then answer that question for you. So let's get stuck in. Let's talk about why. Now, if you're attending this webinar, you might already recognize just how important it is to have a brilliant pitch for your food or beverage product. But just in case you're not, let me recap. one of the key challenges that companies face when it comes to pitching is understanding that the why around having a great pitch is so key to success, both here at home and in international markets. Now, as we've already mentioned, my team and I work with companies who want to expand overseas, and here is what we see a lot of. So the first challenge, the first and most common barrier that we see people facing is fear of selling. So you might have heard this saying, everyone loves to buy, no one wants to be sold to. Perhaps they should have also added, and almost no one wants to sell. So for a lot of business people, the thought of having to go out and sell leaves them feeling cold. So you might be great at what you do and you might have a fantastic product, but you might also be nervous about public speaking, and you might feel as though, having to go and sell to people is something that leaves you feeling a little bit icky. Some of our clients have also told us that they're worried about selling because they feel that people might judge them. They feel a little bit vulnerable, a little bit exposed, a little bit embarrassed. Or they simply think, well, look, I'm not a salesperson. I can't do this. The second problem that we see is that some people just don't really believe that a great pitch is important because they think they can wing it. In other words, they don't have a real pitch. Now, winging it or being confident you can just turn up and pitch with no preparation is the opposite of fear of selling, but it's just as big a problem. So essentially, failing to plan is planning to fail. And we know from experience that companies that don't take pitching seriously usually don't get the results that they're looking for. Generally speaking, winging it leads to bad results. Experienced retailers, distributors, investors, all kinds of people that you're going to be pitching to at Food and Beverage Week, they can all spot a pitch that was made up on the spot a mile off, and they're usually not very impressed by that. So I've seen a number of companies that were overconfident about their pitching skills come unstuck and miss out on great opportunities simply because they weren't properly prepared. Now, the third problem that we see is what I call same pitch, different audience. And this is where people don't believe that it's critical to invest time in understanding your different audiences and tailoring your pitch for each audience. They think, oh, okay, well, one pitch fits all. And they give the same pitch over and over and over again. Now, this approach doesn't work because the pitch that you give to a potential customer isn't the same as the pitch that you give to a potential investor. And the pitch that you give to someone that you just met at a barbecue is totally different in style to the pitch that you give to a room full of investors. So, folks, thinking about these three problems, can you let me know which one of them most resonates with you? If you can let me know by typing a little note for us in the chat box, and you can just write 1, 2, or 3, and Dan will pick up those answers as they come through and read them out for us. Dan, can you do that for me?
Yeah, fantastic. And while we're waiting for those to come in, we've had a couple more people join the webinar. So good afternoon. Thanks for joining. We're just waiting on a couple of responses to come back. Let us know what you think is the biggest fear for your business or from your experience. Number 1, fear of selling. Number 2, trying to wing it. Or number 3, same pitch, different audience. A couple of people here are saying same pitch, different customers. Another person is saying number 1, due to the uncertainty around having an export-ready time frame. Yep, absolutely. Winging it. Number 1, selling. A combination of 2 and 3. Yeah, there's probably a mix of those fears. Someone else is saying trying to wing it. So look, I mean, there's a pretty even spread around those 3 fears. So that sort of definitely resonates with our experience.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So guys, unfortunately, if you let your fear overwhelm you, or you don't take pitching seriously, or you just use the same old pitch over and over again, you're going to miss out on some great opportunities, including the ones that you're specifically pitching for. Now, on the other hand, I know that probably what you prefer and what most entrepreneurs and business owners want is to get comfortable and to get confident. So rather than being scared to sell, you want to be in control. You want to be able to create a really meaningful and authentic experience for your listener, which tells them why they should listen to you and why what you do matters to them. You also want to be armed and ready to pitch. So rather than pitching on the fly, and doing a less than perfect job. You want to be so prepared that you don't even have to think about your pitch. You just open your mouth and the words come right out. And you want to know your material so well that you can answer any questions or objections that come up without missing a beat. And thirdly, you want to make sure that you're giving the right pitch to the right person. So you want to have a small arsenal of different pitches for different audiences that you can deploy just like that at a moment's notice. And you want to be totally comfortable switching your style and your pitch to the situation, and just so that you can, in a position where you can easily adapt for different scenarios. Now, if you understand why it's so important to master pitching, you'll be able to create a relevant, authentic pitch that actually hooks your audience. And that's what we're really aiming to do with a pitch. We're not trying to close a sale the very first time we pitch to someone. We're trying to engage them, to capture their attention and imagination, to get them listening, to get them thinking about us and our product, to get them agreeing with our philosophy and saying to themselves, look, I really need to hear more about this. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to get over our fear of selling. And there are a couple of ways that we can do this. And I'll just talk to you about a couple of those now. So firstly, what you want to do is you want to provide the listener who's meeting you for the first time with a clear, succinct understanding of what you do. So remember that when you pitch, you're not trying to close a sale, especially not on the very first pitch. All you are trying to do is to get people engaged and get them coming back to you for another meeting. So if you can focus on that, it does a lot to reduce the pressure that people often feel when they go to pitch. Secondly, put some work into crafting your pitch. You might have heard the saying, you get what you pitch for and you're always pitching. So if you put a pitch out there which says, I'm desperate, you're going to get a response which subtly says back to you, I smell desperation. If you put a sloppy pitch out there, you'll get a matching result. If you make pitching important, you practice your pitch and you pitch from your heart in the way that reflects not just what you sell, but why you're in business, people will respond to that. They'll respond to your core values and what makes you who you are. And then thirdly, and I can't say it enough, practice, practice, practice. You can never practice pitching enough. And the more you pitch, the more natural and automatic it will become and the less fearful you'll be. So those are a few tips on how to get over the fear of selling. Secondly, again, you need to prepare. So the first step here is to decide who your audience is for each of your pitches. Think about who you're going to be pitching to. Is it an investor? Is it a potential client? Is it a distributor? What are they likely to care about? Generally speaking, where an investor is going to be focused on, for example, understanding your team and what sets your team apart, a customer will want to know, well, what problem does this product solve for me? Why should I buy it? And a distributor might be focused on, well, how is this product better than other similar products that I already distribute? Is it going to make me look better? Will it enhance my prestige? Will it help me to expand my client base? So what I'm saying is the angle for each audience is different. Once you've identified who you're going to be pitching to and what they care about, you need to craft the pitch. So write out your pitch, including all the relevant sections. And I'd suggest that you write it out longhand so that it really gets stuck in your brain. And finally, you want to perfect your pitch, taking a good pitch and then turning it into a great one by refining it and improving it. Again, the best way of doing this is to practice, practice, practice. So practice by yourself, practice on your family, practice on your colleague, practice on your mates at the pub, practice on your dog, just practice on anyone who's going to listen. To get the best results, I think that you should be pitching every day for at least 15 minutes. And then you need to get comfortable pitching. And I think that you need to have, realistically speaking, at least 3 pitches. So at a minimum, you should have an elevator pitch. And your elevator pitch is a quick pitch which lets you state your passion and your purpose in one sentence. You also need a social pitch. And this is a slightly longer pitch which you would use in a social situation. So for instance, you should feel really comfortable telling someone who you've only just met at a barbecue or a cocktail party what you do. And then thirdly, you should have a formal pitch. And this is the kind of pitch that goes with a pitch deck. And the formal pitch is the full version of the pitch is the one that you give to a room of investors when you need to raise capital or get somebody to sign up a major partnership with you. Dan.
Yep. So thanks for that, Cynthia. And I guess now that we've covered, why it's so important for you to have a great pitch in the first place, we could probably, just kind of reflect on that. So, I mean, does anyone have any questions about what we've covered in this first section? If you do, again, just pop them in the chat box. But remember, this is just the first of sort of 3 sections. So why you need to have a great pitch in the first place, and some of the reasons why that really matters. So let me know, and we'll add them in as they come through. But now that we've covered that, it really kind of ties into the next session, which is focused on what actually goes into making a killer pitch. So Cynthia, maybe you can talk us through that one now.
Sure, Dan. So what is it that makes a killer pitch? As we work with companies expanding overseas and or looking to raise capital, here is what we often notice about their pitches. Firstly, they're unclear on the structure of the pitch. They wonder, well, what comes first? Do I talk about my team first, or maybe they want to hear about the financials, or is it product benefits? Often people are also unsure about what to include in the pitch, which information is relevant. I mean, how much detail is the right amount? And thirdly, they're often quite uncertain about length. So they say things like, well, how much information is too much? I don't want to miss out on any really important stuff, but I definitely don't want to bore people either. So folks, just very quickly, let me know which of these can you most relate to. And if you can do that by writing a little note in the chat box. So which of these concerns you most? Is it getting the structure of your pitch right and knowing what order to present in? Is it understanding what content needs to go into a good pitch? Or is it that you're worried about how long you should make your pitch? Just take a moment and just let me know 1, 2, or 3. And you can't have all 3. You have to pick one. So have a bit of a think about it and let us know which of these is most important to you.
Yeah, thanks. Pamela has said, she's identified all 3, so we definitely understand. But thanks for letting us know. Annalise says number 2. The content is really important to her. Thanks, Annalise. Gemma and Cosmos, both identify number 3, getting the length right. Okay. And Kate is saying what order it needs to go in and how much to reveal. Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's not necessarily just about the structure. It's also about how much you give away, isn't it? I mean, we've talked about the importance of getting someone kind of hooked and interested in what you do and curious. And the purpose of your pitch is really about getting them to the next meeting, the next conversation. And I think that's a really good point, Kate. How much do you give away sort of in that first pitch? Jackie's saying number 2, the content is really important. Paul is saying both the length and the content. And Pamela, again, okay, Pamela's whittled it down to one answer, and she said the content. Yeah, so I think that's really good. Thanks, everyone. And I think, based on that, content is obviously a really big factor for everyone's decision-making process and how they design these, probably followed by the structure and then the length, number 3.
Okay. That is really helpful. Thank you, everyone, for sharing that, because it just helps us get a better understanding of what you need. So what I see when people are lacking in clarity about content, structure, and length is that they feel uneasy and uncomfortable when they go to pitch. And what happens is that shows up in their pitch. It affects their performance. I'm pretty sure, though, that what these clients of mine want and what you guys want is clarity. And you want to be clear on structure. In other words, you want to be confident about what goes where in your pitch. You also want to be clear on content. You want to know exactly what to include in your pitch. And finally, you want to be clear on length. So you want to be absolutely sure that you have just the right amount of information in the pitch, enough to engage and intrigue people, but not enough to put them to sleep. So I'm not going to ask you which is most important again, because I think we are fairly clear on that from the answers that you've just given. But I do want to say that if you can get these elements of your pitch right, your structure, your content, and your length, then you're going to be well on your way to giving a confident and charismatic pitch. If there are any questions now, please type them in the chat box as they spring to mind. I won't pause for it. As we see them come through, Dan can let me know. I'm now going to move on, though, and just talk about how we create a killer pitch. So that's really the second part of our presentation today. And what I'm going to teach you now is what I call the 7-step structure for a great pitch. Now, there is a lot of content that we're going to cover over the next few slides. And although we're recording this and sending you a copy of the slides and the recording afterwards, if you want to take notes, that is probably not a bad idea because there is quite a bit of content coming up. So let's dig in. Step 1 is clarity. So in the clarity step, what we are trying to do is to provide the listener who's never met you before with a really clear, succinct understanding of what you do. And this is really where we introduce ourselves. And to introduce ourselves, we use a formula that I call, and I didn't make it up, but it's called name, same, but different. So we tell them name, and the name is our industry, same, our niche, and then our micro niche, and that's what is really different about us. So our industry, our niche, what we do that is special, and then our micro niche, and this is your very special area of focus. So let me try and make that clear for you by giving an example. So if I was pitching Dearin Associates, I would start by saying, I'm Cynthia Dearin from Dearin Associates. We're an international business consultancy that helps companies take what they do well in the home market and expand it overseas. We specialize in working with micro to medium-sized firms looking to go international for the first time. And so that tells people what industry I'm in, international business consulting, what we do, what is kind of the same. We help people to take what they do well here and expand it overseas. And then I tell them something about, our ideal clients, what our special area of focus is, and that is micro to medium-sized firms looking to go international for the first time. So that is step 1, clarity. Step 2 is the credibility step. And in the credibility step, what we're trying to do is we're trying to show why you are good at what you do. We're creating context for the audience about why they should keep listening to you. So this could also be called the authority step. You're establishing your authority as an expert and an authority in your area and saying to people, you need to listen to me because I'm very credible. So the question is, how do you do that? Now, we could probably spend half a day just working on the credibility step, but I'm going to try and give it to you in a couple of minutes. You can establish authority in your field in one of 4 ways. You can either show people that you're an expert in a particular technology. So you can talk about, let's say, I'm going to use the example of a producer of vodka who says, we have a fantastic vodka filtration technology which makes very pure vodka. That establishes them as having credibility. You can claim expertise in a particular industry. You can claim expertise in the customer perspective, and this kind of point of view is called often called the customer's shoes, and this is one that Richard Branson and Virgin are famous for. So you might know that Richard Branson has started a series of businesses. Each time he started a business, he didn't have any expertise in that field. So how he claimed credibility and got people to see him as an authority was by saying, we understand the customer's viewpoint. So, he says, I've flown on an airplane and I know what a terrible experience it is usually flying on an airplane. I'm going to create something which responds to what the customer needs and what I have seen customers need from my experience. So those are the first 3 ways that you can use. The 4th way that you can use to demonstrate credibility is to demonstrate some evidence that your market values what you do. So what do I mean by that? Well, for example, if you're pitching to a potential international customer and you make beverages, you might say, we're one of the top 5 beverage retailers in Victoria, and our products are stocked by all the major supermarkets. And because you can say to somebody truthfully, our products are in all the major supermarkets, that establishes in the mind of the listener that the market values what you do because you are already selling your stuff to the big players. So step 2 is all about establishing credibility. Now, in step 3, we look at the problem. People basically buy things to solve problems, to meet needs and to solve problems. So in the 3rd step, what you want to do is you want to articulate what problem you solve for your ideal clients. And what you want to do here is to really clearly and concisely summarize the market's problem. So you need to convince your listener that there's something that needs doing that's not actually being done at the moment, or that you can do better, cheaper, faster, to a higher standard in a new and different way than is currently being done. So let me give you an example of how that might work. I used the example of a company that makes high quality vodka a moment ago, and I'll use that again. So if you are the company that makes vodka and you want to demonstrate a problem, we could say we offer our customers the chance to experience full strength spirits without the risk of negative health effects, which are commonly associated with vodka. So what you're saying is normal vodka is really bad for your health, but actually we produce vodka that is not bad for your health. Let me give you another example, which might be relevant for some people here around gourmet gluten-free products. So if you make gourmet gluten-free bread, you might say, well, we make gluten-free bread for people who want to eat bread that tastes like real bread. So you're identifying a problem there, which is that, okay, well, we've noticed that lots of people have to have gluten-free bread, but unfortunately the problem is gluten-free bread on the whole doesn't taste that great. Our bread's different, and we'll talk to you about, how our bread is different in a moment. So that is the third step, which is the problem step. Let me just ask as we go through, I know we're covering a lot of ground. Please let me know if I'm going too quickly. Please let me know if any specific questions have come up for you as we go through. Let me go on now and talk about step 4. So in step 4, we talk about the solution. So once you've outlined the problem that you solve, you need to present a plausible, remarkable, and believable solution. And what I'm saying here is that the solution that you present has to be grounded, it has to make sense, and it has to be real. So when you tell your solution to somebody, they have to nod and think, yeah, that sounds like it could definitely work. Let me give you another example, and I'm going to use our vodka company that makes very high quality pure vodka again. So in the vodka example, you could say, we do this, and I've already said that we produce vodka that does not leave you with negative health effects. How do we do this? We do this by using a unique filtration system to produce a vodka with close to 0 impurities, which doesn't leave you hungover like other vodkas do. So that is the 4th step, which is solution. So far we've covered clarity, credibility or authority, the problem that you solve, and the solution, how it is that you solve it. Now the 5th step is really about why. This is called the why step. Well, this is really the essence of what you do. And you might be wondering, well, why would you put this here at the end? Well, the reason that you put the why step here is you are putting what you do in context by explaining why. And what I mean from that is, well, apart from the money, what is your ultimate mission? Why do you get out of bed? And this step is key because although you might not think so, people tend to buy why you do what you do rather than the product that you sell. Let me give you an example. I was at Fine Food Australia, I think the week before last, and I went and talked to a company from Western Australia that made fruit juice, and it was cold pressed fruit juice, and it was pretty good. And I had a taste of it, and I thought, oh, this is quite good fruit juice. And then I actually talked to the founder, and she talked to me for about 15 minutes about her mission to reuse produce which is wasted at the farm gate. And she gave me statistics about the huge volumes of product that don't even leave the farm and how they get wasted. Now, one of her missions is to help people to prevent all that waste, and that's part of their philosophy around creating the juices and the products that they do. Another kind of thing that she articulated for me was that they work with a lot of patients that have eating difficulties, and they produce products which are easy to eat for people who are very, very ill with cancer or who are very aged. So she spent a lot of time talking about why she does what she does, and it is just amazing how compelling it is when you hear that from somebody. Let me give you an example of how at Dearin Associates we talk about our why. So when we're thinking about international business, we say we believe that international business can be a force for good, and our goal is to help 100,000 small companies from around the world to expand into international markets. And so that is one way that we talk about why. So that is the why step at number 5. Now, number 6, and we are nearly at the end of the step, so bear with me. Number 6 is the opportunity step. So here, if your audience, you're presenting the opportunity. So if your audience, if the listener was going to work with you, what would be the opportunity that they'd be getting access to? So let's say that you're pitching to a distributor from overseas. You might say, and I know we've got some confectionery people on here today, so you might say, if you were to work with our company, you'd have the opportunity to represent one of Victoria's best-known confectionery brands in Southeast Asia. And look, that's just one example. It will be better for, different for everybody, but what we're trying to do here is show people what they get access to when they decide to work with you. Now, lastly, we have step 7, which is the reputation step. And what we're doing here is we want to finish on a high. So we want to define what you want to be known for, and you want to end with a powerful customer impact or emotional takeaway. And that's because people remember what you say first and what you say last. So there are 2 parts to solidifying your reputation in the mind of the listener. Firstly, you want to define what you are or what you intend to be known for. And then you want to give a sense of how you leave your customers feeling. So, you know, if you were the vodka company again, you could say, for example, you know, we're known for producing the highest quality, purest vodka available. That's why we're called pure vodka. That's a very simple example. Now, we've covered a swag of material there. Dan, have any questions come through from people as we've been going through that 7-step process?
Yeah, we haven't had any direct questions, but I think it's a really good opportunity for you guys to all pose them if you do have one. I mean, this has really been quite a meaty part of today's presentation, and like Cynthia said, there was a lot to take in. So if you do have a question about something that we've just covered in the 7-step process to making a great pitch, let us know, because now's a really good opportunity for us to help clarify what we've spoken about. You know, these 7 steps from clarity all the way through to reputation. And I mean, you know, this is based on a proven framework that we've used, that we've helped many companies use in the past. So there's a lot of experience and a lot of sort of history that's gone into this. But, you know, given that it's probably quite new to everyone on the webinar, and you might be thinking, oh, look, it makes sense, but there's a certain part that I don't quite get, or you might have a, you know, specific question, do let us know before we move on, because it's a really good opportunity to clarify before we get to the 3rd section.
So while we're waiting for those to come through, oh, have you got one?
No, I was just saying, looks like there's no questions, so we might move on.
That's okay. All right. So we've talked about the structure of the pitch in the last section, and so now what I want to do is I want to go on and look at the specific food and beverage related bits of content that would go into a food and beverage related pitch. And you might be wondering, well, is it important and what should I include? Well, the answer is it's very important. And here are a few key items that, depending on the context, you might or might not feature in your initial pitch, but you should definitely be able to talk about these things either in a formal pitch or often as part of the question and answer conversation that comes after you pitch to somebody. So what are these key ingredients? Well, firstly, I want to talk about making sure that you meet a need. Sure, I'm sure everybody here on this webinar has a product that tastes fantastic, but it is critical that you can also articulate how it meets what the consumer needs, and if you are selling this to a retail buyer, how it meets what the retail buyer needs. So we've talked briefly about outlining how your product meets a consumer need. What is it that a retailer is going to need? And here I want to talk about numbers as they relate to retailers. And again, it doesn't matter how great your product tastes, you won't be able to pitch convincingly if you don't know your key numbers. So if you're selling to retail, let me give you a few of the most important ones. So the first one is suggested retail price, and the other is gross margin. And I'm going to assume that, you know, most people know what these are, but I'll recap it as a just in case. So your suggested retail price is the price of your product without any discounts or sales. The retail buyer that you're pitching to is going to have price points for each product category. And so your product has to be in the range that they've set. If you are priced too low, you won't make enough money. And if you are too high, so if you're above the upper end of their suggested retail price, they won't stock you because there will be too much risk for them to give you valuable shelf space. So the risk for them is they stock your product and then it's too expensive and nobody buys it. So suggested retail price is really important. So I'd say here, make sure you know your SRP and make sure you know how it compares with the rest of the market. You might be wondering how you find this out. Well, I would say visit a handful of stores, look at some products that are similar to yours or departments where you think your product should be sold, and work out, where the best chance of success is. If you find that you are well below or above the SRP range, you might want to reconsider how you formulate and price your product. So if you make, if it's vodka again, let's keep going to vodka. If you make specialty vodka, perhaps you want to visit some alcohol retailers and ask the manager or the buyer at one of those stores whether you're priced to sell. So those are a few tips around SRP. Now, what about gross margin? Well, simply put, your gross margin is how much out of every dollar of sales a retail business actually keeps in earnings. And retailers want to know the gross margin of your product in dollars and in percent. So when the buyer asks what your gross margin is, usually they're looking for a percentage number. And I would say that you must know this number by heart. That's important. So again, doing your homework here is important. It's a little bit more difficult, but if you dig around for long enough, you should be able to find out an approximate gross margin requirement or a range. And you do it basically by doing what we call research by driving around. So going around, visiting some relevant establishments and talking to people. And the key here is really to be a bit persistent. Eventually, you're going to find somebody friendly enough who will, help you to dig out that information that you're looking for. What are some other key ingredients? Well, I think getting in touch with food trends is very important. So as I'm sure you already know, because we've talked about it, consumers buy a product either because they want to fulfill a need or they have a specific problem that they want to solve. If you are having trouble succinctly pointing to a problem or a need that your product fulfills, that is a deal breaker. So you have to be able to articulate how your product either solves a problem or fulfills a need for somebody. One way of working out problems or needs is to look at consumer trends. And this is pretty easy to do, given that most mainstream media outlets are reporting on food pretty frequently. So there are a few of the key ingredients. Now, I'd also, and lastly on this slide, mention that you need to know the right size for your retailer. You could, I'll give you an example of a producer of olive oil. So there was an olive oil company that was producing bottles of olive oil that were packed 12 to a case. Now, they were only having cases with 12 bottles, and as they did demonstrations and slots, they were giving away way too much product. And they also found that lots of the smaller stores only wanted 6 bottles per case so that they could test the product more readily on the shelf, especially with shelf-stable products that were taking longer to move. Now, that company changed the packing to 6 per case, and they found that that really improved sales. So, folks, there are a few ingredients for a killer pitch in the food and beverage space. Now, I wanted to talk lastly in this section about length. How long is too long? And here I want to mention Guy Kawasaki. And I don't know if any of you have heard of Guy Kawasaki, but this guy is a famous venture capitalist. And Guy listens to pitches all day, every day. And one of his biggest complaints, and I've heard him speak about this a number of times, but one of his biggest complaints is that people pitch for way too long. Here's what he has to say about how long your pitch should be. Guy has a rule called the 10, 20, 30 rule, and it's a really good one to remember. So what's the 10 part of the rule? 10 is for 10 slides in the deck. And Guy says he doesn't care how great your idea is, you can only have 10 slides in the deck, no more. What about the 20 part of the rule? Well, 20 minutes is for the pitch. Guy says don't ever pitch for more than 20 minutes, even if you're doing a formal pitch. And you might say, well, I've got an hour to pitch. Fair enough, but other things are going to have to be squeezed into that hour. And if you go on and on and on and on and on, especially if people are listening to a lot of pitches, you're going to lose them because their eyes will just glaze over and they'll go to sleep. We're going to come back to the 30 part of the rule in just a second. So remember, many of the people you're going to be pitching to, especially in a business matching context like during Food and Beverage Week, a lot of these people will be hearing lots and lots of pitches. So if you can't get your message across to them clearly and succinctly in the space of just a few minutes, you will have lost them. So the takeaway here is that less is really more.
All right,
and that is all I've got for you on that slide.
Yeah, and look, Cynthia's just given us, the key ingredients for a great pitch as they relate to everyone here in the food and beverage sector. We're getting towards the back part of the webinar, and I won't hold everyone up and continue to ask for questions. A reminder that you can continue to put them in the box. Paul asked a really good question a few moments ago just around how long a pitch should be, particularly around the 7 elements and making sure you get all those in. Paul, I hope we've covered that in the last slide. Let us know if you need more detail. But we might just keep moving.
I'll just say on that one, Dan, so 20 minutes is for a formal pitch with a pitch deck. If you're standing up and just doing the 7-step pitch as a once through in that framework that I gave you, that is really a 5-minute pitch. And I have actually had to do that framework in 5 minutes, and it's quite difficult. So you have to really write out your pitch, and then you cut it and cut it and cut it, and you practice it and time it. Because if you ever do a pitching competition where everybody is competing for the best pitch, the judges are looking at clarity and speed. So they're really looking for you to be able to get your whole beautiful, convincing story out in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. So
shall I go on?
Please do.
Okay, so guys, now you know why it's important to create a great pitch, and we've talked about some of the key things that you need to include. So you're all set, right? Not quite. You can put lots of work into your pitch, but if you make mistakes, you can get off track pretty quickly. And what happens if that happens is that you're going to waste all that hard work. So here are a few of the big mistakes that I see often. Forgetting the financials. So this mistake applies most directly to pitches where you have a deck, but the principle applies to all kinds of pitching. You are not going to do well if you forget your financials. Secondly, you cannot afford to ignore the competition or to put them down. So that's really important. And thirdly, whatever you do, don't you dare to bore your audience. Again, if you bore your audience, you will have completely lost them. Now, if you do these things, what is going to happen is that your pitch will flop. So that doesn't happen, it's better to address the competition head on. It's better to make sure that your pitches include relevant numbers and that you wow your audience. And if you can do these things, then you're going to create a pitch that sticks. Very quickly, can you let me know by writing in the chat box which one is most important to you? Is it to have the right financials? Is it to know how to handle a competition? Or is it that you are able to wow your audience? Dan, you might be able to just read those out for me.
Yeah, I can. Gemma's written in number 1. Michelle has said all with an exclamation mark. She wants to be able to do all 3. That's fantastic. Camilla's said number 3, wowing your audience. Scott and Paul both say wow your audience. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it could partly be the graphic that we've got on the screen. I mean, if you can get people to respond like that to your pitch, you must be doing something right. Kate is saying to have the right financials is something that she feels that she needs to work on. Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that you know that. And hopefully some of this information can be really helpful to you, Kate. Annalise is saying number 3, wowing the audience. And Kim has said both the financials and wowing the audience. All right, thanks guys. That's a great spread.
Okay, so that you can create a pitch that sticks, how do you do that? We're just going to give you some quick tips here. The first one is, as I've said, make sure you know your numbers and make sure they're the right numbers. So make sure that your pitches include relevant numbers. If you are pitching to an investor using a deck, you'll want to do that in the context of talking about your business model. So I suggest that you include 3 to 5 years of financial projections. I'm not saying you put them all on the slide, but you need to know them. You should mention key and critical assumptions in your model of expenses, including things like your customer conversion rate, your market penetration percentage, your price and volume assumptions, and foreign exchange risk. You should also know your total number of customers, your total revenue, your total expenses, and your EBITDA or your net profit. And you should know, if you can, the numbers for each of those categories for the last 3 years off by heart. Now, even if you're not doing a formal pitch, it's a really good idea to know these numbers anyway, as well as your gross margin and your suggested retail price, and in case questions pop up around them. So knowing the numbers makes you look like a pro. Not knowing them and having to go and excuse yourself and dig them up, that's going to make you look like an amateur, which is something that you definitely do not want to do. What about competitors? Well, you need to acknowledge your competition. So you need to assume that your audience knows as much and maybe more than you do about your segment. So if you say, oh, we have no competition, it usually means that you're either A, clueless, or B, you're addressing a market that doesn't really exist. So instead of saying we have no competitors, you should actually go and analyze your competition, and then you should address it head on. Analyze their product and analyze their positioning against your own. And you know what? It's okay to talk about what the competition does better than you. And that's because it builds credibility. So if you're ready to admit how your competition is better than you, people are much more likely to believe you when you then turn around and discuss how you are better than the competition. Also, never, ever, ever put the competition down, because it makes you look like a bad sport, and nobody wants to work with a bad sport. What about ways to add wow factor? Well, make your presentation beautiful if you're using a deck. Now, I said come back to the 30 part of Guy Kawasaki's 10, 20, 30 rule. Guy says you should never use text smaller than 30-point font. And that's because, firstly, people struggle to read smaller text. And secondly, and more importantly, because it forces you to use less text so that you really know your presentation. So you do not want to be getting up there with the deck and reading the deck. If you do that, people will think that you are kind of a bozo. I should also say, if you're wondering what size font is on this deck that we've used today, it's all 60 points. So to give you an idea, you know, that's a 60-point font. 30 is already half of that. Don't ever use anything less than 30. You should also only put your core points on the slide, and you should make sure that you use high quality images. So please do not go and download whatever free images you can find on Google Images and put those in your deck. Spend a bit of money, go and get really great high resolution images and put those in your deck so that the deck looks fantastic. And lastly, folks, and I might have already said this, do not read your slides. They're just there as a prompt and to give your listeners something to look at and to focus on. So guys, what does that mean for you? We've now talked about why you need a strong pitch, what to include in your pitch, and we've given you some tips on how to make your pitch memorable and engaging. So if you can use these tools, then you can go ahead and create a great pitch. If you can actually create that great pitch, can you let me know by writing in the chat box, what will it mean for you? So just tell Dan and I now, if you can create a great pitch, what will that mean for you? What will that mean for your food and beverage export business? And Dan, you might like to read some of those out for me as they come through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say, feel free to focus, when you're thinking of this answer, feel free to focus on some of the insights that you've got from the webinar. I mean, I'm sure there's one or two things that have probably resonated with each of you, and they might be different from things that have resonated with other people. Stephen has written in and said it would mean that he could generate more interest from potential customers. Absolutely. I mean, that's what hopefully you can all do with a great pitch. And that's probably something that everyone's obviously trying to achieve as they move forward. Scott's written in and said it means for his business that they'll be able to broaden their international reach opportunities. Yeah, fantastic. Yes. I mean, all very, very relevant.
So folks, what is next? Where do we go from here? Well, we are nearly out of time. We've got 5 minutes left, but it has been great having everybody on the call today. And thank you so much for sticking around until the end. As we mentioned at the start, we're going to send all of the people who attended a copy of the slides and the recording so that you can watch it again and that you can use the resources to create a pitch. With what we've covered together in the last hour, you've now got a high-level framework to go out and actually do the work of creating your pitch. However, I realize that we've pretty much only scratched the surface in the last hour. As I mentioned earlier, we could probably spend a couple of days just working on how to develop and refine a pitch for each of you. And I do know that some of you might feel like you want more help. So we also have another gift for people who've stayed until the end of today's session. As Dan and I mentioned, Dearin Associates works with micro to medium-sized businesses to help them speed up and de-risk their international expansion. And that includes helping people to create and deliver fantastic pitches. So what we would like to do today is we would like to invite everybody who's stayed to the end to a complimentary 1-hour strategy session where we will work with you to map out your business, your growth aspirations, and your next steps for international expansion. We'll also talk about which of our services might be a fit for you or your team. Now, you'll come away with a high-level working strategy document which you can keep, along with a recording of our session for you to listen back to with your team if that's appropriate. You can use the document on your own, you can use it with another international consultant, or you can use it with us if you decide that you'd like to work with us. These sessions usually take an hour or so, and out in the real world, we charge $225 for a session. In our experience, clients usually get at least a 300% return on their investment. So in other words, the clarity that they get from the session and from the document saves them at least $1,000 of their time in figuring out what they should be doing. So for people in today's webinar, we're offering this session free of charge, but the offer's only open until the end of today. So if you would like to book a complimentary strategy session with us, you can let us know in 2 ways. You can either type now in the chat box and Dan will get in touch with you to set up a time. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can send a note to dan.price@dearinassociates.com and Dan will put his email address into the chat box for you now. It would be really helpful for us if you're going to do that, if you could just title the email complimentary strategy session and we will pick it up and come back to you and organize a time. So again, folks, if you'd like to take up that offer, that is an offer just for the people on this webinar and just for today. Feel free to go ahead and take that up if that appeals to you. Guys, we're nearly out of time. So Dan, go ahead.
No, you're all good. I was just going to say, we've had a couple of people write in and say that they would like to take up the offer, so I'll make sure we reach out to you. And again, you do have my details there. But like Cynthia said, we have pretty much run out of time. There's a couple of minutes left. So if anyone does have any questions for Cynthia or myself on the content, I think now is the best opportunity to have them raised. So let us know.
Yeah. So folks, what did you learn today? We have covered quite a lot of material in a short space of time. Can I get everyone to write in the chat box one thing that you found really useful from the webinar that you're going to take away with you this afternoon and implement into your pitch? So just one thing that you found was really valuable that you think you can use going forward. And Dan, if you could read those answers out for us, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So Cosmos has written in and he said proper planning. Yep. And that's a big one. Pamela has said the format of her pitch. That's a really good lesson, and that's something that we've covered a lot today. Leon has said, knowing his financials and looking like a pro, absolutely. Michelle has said the SRP and the numbers to include, all very important, and again, all things you should know off by heart. Jackie has said that she really likes the 10-20-30 rule. Yeah, I mean, that's something that will stick with me as well, I think. And Gemma has said that the 7 steps for a great strategy, but in particular, the problem and the solution. And great pickup, Gemma. Those are 2 really important parts of that 7-step process. Paul has said the importance of focusing the pitch preparation. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every minute that you invest in the preparation, I think is just going to yield massive results when you're actually delivering it. Kate has said having her financials ready for prospective listeners. Annalise has said that having the structure of the pitch right is critical for her. So she's thanked us, and thank you, Annalise, for your answer. And the last one there from Scott, he's just said that the 7 steps are a really good guide to content and format. Absolutely. Thanks everyone for your answers. Those are some great takeaways. Okay, look, those were some great answers. So thanks from me as well. Well, guys, and girls, ladies and gentlemen, everybody, that's about it for the webinar. We've actually got no minutes left, but we will do a quick question and answer. So if anybody has a final question that they'd like to ask before we close the webinar, please put it in the chat box. Otherwise, if something comes to mind later, please send Dan an email, and Dan and I will sit down and get back to you with the best answer that we can come up with. All right, sounds good. I'm not seeing many more questions come in. A couple of more people just saying they'd like to take us up on the complimentary strategy session. Absolutely, we'll make sure we've got your details and you can write to us directly. Cosmos and Camilla are both quite grateful for the opportunity to learn this, and absolutely, it was our pleasure teaching you and having you join us on the session. So it looks like we'll give another 10 seconds or so, but it looks like there's probably not any more questions. I mean, if there is, if you think of something after you get off the call and you didn't have a chance to ask it, or it hits you as soon as you hang up, do let us know. We're more than happy to fill you in on anything we've covered and try to clarify any of the content. No? All right, great. Well, that's probably a wrap. So thanks again, everyone, for your time. It's been our pleasure, and best of luck as you all go out there and start, crafting and designing and giving these fantastic pictures. We really wish you all the best, and we'll be really keen to hear how they go and how they play out over the course of Food and Beverage Trade Week in October.
Thanks, everyone. Over and out.